which now is ending, the bourgeois. A fleeing serf, he became a burgher of the market town, then of the city, and behind its secure walls, the guilds flourish. Cloth keeps crossing the walls, and commerce awakens the dreaming country. Seaports build ships that sail to new shores, busily round Africa, and set courageous sights on American gold. Opening Chinese and East Indian markets, the new world, the accumulation of wares and monies give wings to manufacture, and powerful there appears from feudal relations a new societal ruler, the burgher. Industry overtakes crafts. Long will endure the distaff, but the master crosses the market with less resounding footsteps. And work once divided by guilds is now by the factory owner divided within one bigger workshop, and still the markets insatiably grow. Even manufacture can no longer fill the new demands, and lo, machines and steam overturn all again, and manufacture gives way to captain of industry, commander of workers, and financier, our bourgeois. The teachers show us in detail how large machine-based industry created a worldwide market, and the market in turn helped to concentrate industry till the bourgeoisie had fought its way to eminent rule. State power attends to the business of the bourgeoisie now, clothed in pomp and purple raiment, a willing executive board. This class has proved a hard and most impatient mistress. With brazen cheek and iron heel, it stamped out the rotten patriarchally still idyll, tore up the feudal old motley ties that bound protector and protege, permitting no nexus but naked self-interest between people, payment in cash. The chivalric masters and loyal servants, love of native soil, honest craftsmanship, serving a cause or inner calling, it has drowned in the icy jet of calculation and brutally sold off dignity of persons as small change. In place of the numberless chartered freedoms, it set up the sole freedom of trade. No doubt those ties were a natural pious exploitation. Now it is naked and shamelessly wielded. Physician and priest and judge and poet and researcher in the past still met with pious awe. It hires as workers for wage, sends to the doctor the ailing as paying customers, and he sells his recipe, and the priest sells his consolation. Justice may now be purchased from the watchman of property, the judge. Whatever plows its inventor imagined, its dealer sells for swords. Hungrily, the artist glorifies, with quick nobilitating brushstroke, the bourgeoisie's visage. Versed in the artifices of art, he massages for money the lady's languid emotions. Smirking, the bourgeois turns the poets and thinkers into paid lackeys. The temple of knowledge becomes a stock exchange, and even the family's holy abode, hustling, he stamps with the seal of unholy fling.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tam. Before we actually get started now.
Sorry, you need to unmute.
The sound problems.
You need to unmute.
Yeah. Is that better now?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, before we get started with Anne's input, I just wanted to remind everybody who's in this room, please, put your telephones, turn them off or mute them completely. That is phone calls and notifications, please. That would be very helpful. Anne will be speaking for around about 40 minutes, and then, as usual, we'll open the floor for debate. And her topic today is on Ireland, the rise of nationalism, Sinn Fein, and the collapse of people before profits left government strategy. Get started.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you, comrades. So what I'm going to try and do today is tackle the concept of Irish nationalism and the response of the left. So I won't take things exactly in the order of that very long title I devised and insisted on. Anyway, but nevertheless, I think it was useful to lay it out in terms of the issues that are before the left in the working class. So, as many of you will know, Ireland has been, in one way or another, subject of the British Crown for hundreds of years. 800 years, it's said, but it became more of a colony with the invasion of Oliver Cromwell, and before him, I think, Henry II in the 17th century, in which there was brutal economic, social, religious oppression in Ireland, and there were the plantations in Ireland around about the same time, which basically meant that it was a settler colony or an attempted settler colony, which was settled in Ulster to some degree successfully, settled quite successfully in Leinster and in Munster. So there are 4 provinces. And then the west of Ireland was basically, they just couldn't tame the people. So I think they more or less gave up on that. So from this time onwards, you have the integration, particularly in the north of Ireland, as it became of Scottish Protestant peoples. So I've already mentioned the economic oppression. In the 19th century, there was a failure of the crop which fed the majority of the peasantry, the potato, and with that came an enormous, I suppose really I would call it a genocide of the peasantry, as the crop failed, and at the same time they continued to export produce to Britain for the population there, where there was dairy and wheat continued to be exported. So the famine is a very bitter part of Irish history, and even today there's still bitterness among the population and awareness of that, which I suppose has been part of the reason why the Irish population has responded so in such a strong way to what's happening in Gaza. There's a kind of an identifying factor between the Irish experience of colonialism and the Palestinian one. So the history, as I know most comrades are aware, the history of British colonialism in Ireland has been a history of constant struggle, of different forms of struggle, from the land leagues to the peasant rebellions, to the United Irishmen. There are too many, to speak about here, and in any event, it's not really the focus of the talk today. In 1916, there was an uprising, which really was a very small number of people that decided to go to Dublin, to march on Dublin, and to proclaim an Irish Republic. And that included a number of nationalists of different political views, from deeply conservative to more liberal, to James Connolly, the great Labour leader and member of the Second International. And his his organisation, the Irish Citizens Army, was part of that rebellion. So the rebellion itself was very short-lived. They basically went onto the roof of the Irish GPO, Boland's Mills, and raised the Irish tricolour, or in Connolly's case, I think he attempted to raise the Starry Plough, which was his flag of his movement. So now I just want to look at the history of the tricolour and the meaning of the tricolour. So the Irish tricolour was designed by Thomas Francis Marr, and he was a Republican, I think, connected with the United Irishmen in 1848. And the colour is the green, white, and orange, or gold. So the green, of course, was for the Irish people, the white is for peace, and the orange is for the Orange Order, the Protestants. So the idea of the flag was that there would be peace between the two communities. He, in fact, afterwards found himself in prison and escaped and went on to play a role as a general in the American Civil War. So the flag that was raised above the GPO was this flag, and it became synonymous with the fight for Irish freedom. After the 1916 uprising, there was a general election where the Sinn Fein received 90% of the vote, and the British government found itself in difficulty in terms of how would they deal with this problem of Ireland. And what they decided to do was to divide Ireland, and you would have the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, which doesn't in fact include the whole province, and the 26 counties of the south. And the 26 counties of the south was going to be like the Free State, which did not have formal absolute independence. There was a big upsurge among the Republicans who had fought for Irish independence against the likes of Michael Collins, you may know his name. He was the one who negotiated with the British government, and there was a big upsurge, and there was a civil war began, which was a very bloody affair. But interestingly, both the new state and the rebels used the same flag. It was a flag of Irish independence or autonomy in some way, but it symbolised the struggle of each of them. Then the War of Independence was defeated by the state, and the Irish Free State became a more permanent establishment, and then later received independence as a republic. So the Irish Constitution specifies that the flag of Ireland is the yellow, white and green, or green, white and gold, and that this is the way, it should be flown. You can't fly another flag over it. Perhaps this is kind of something common in all constitutions, but it's held as a symbol with a great deal of reverence. It's very important. If you insult that flag, you will get into a lot of trouble, as I have found myself. So James Connolly predicted that if Ireland was divided after 1916, there would be a carnival reaction, and that the Irish labour movement would be destroyed in terms of its unity, north and south. At the time of partition, the movement in the north of Ireland was extremely strong, very militant, but of course that all changed with the introduction of partition, and that movement was crushed by the British government. However, as is always the case with Ireland, the struggle continues in some form or another, and from the 1930s, I suppose, really onwards, the Republican movement reinvigorated itself in the north of Ireland. So they also use the tricolour as a symbol of their continuing struggle for full independence, for unity in Ireland. Yes, so, okay. So, yeah, so today, you'll see, if anybody is aware of the group NECAP, which I'm sure lots of younger people here will be, and others of us will know them because they've been so controversial in terms of their stance against the United States and the United Kingdom's support of Israel, and their defiance. And their popularity, I think, owes a great deal to their defiance, but they use the tricolour, and one of the band members, I can't remember his name, he wears a balaclava in the colours. I mean, they aren't straightforward Irish nationalists by any means. I mean, they really do take the piss out of the IRA and many aspects of the Irish struggle. But nevertheless, this is their flag, is the Irish flag. So for them, it symbolises self-determination, it symbolises radicalism, it symbolises everything that Ireland is meant to be about. Ireland is meant to be about rebellion against empire, solidarity with colonial struggles, and therefore they're proud to raise this flag. And certainly in the north, the use of the tricolour is different to that in the south. So in the south, the Irish tricolour has become synonymous with the Irish state. Now, this is my view, which I've argued with comrades in Ireland, and it's not a generally accepted one. The idea is that the Irish state stole the tricolour and has used it to camouflage its neoliberalism, its capitalistic oppression of the people, but that the flag itself belongs with the actions of 1916 and the struggle against oppression. So Eamon de Valera was a very long-time politician in the south of Ireland. Thank God he's dead now. He was a man of immense Catholic faith. He had actually been one of the people who participated in the 1916 uprising and in the struggle in the Civil War. He was president or Taoiseach, which is our prime minister, which the BBC doesn't seem to understand anyway. So from around 1932 to 73. When he died, apparently he was buried in a priest's robe, such was his dedication. Anyway, so Ireland under De Valera was a hellish place for women and for anybody who was gay or in any way rocked the boat, who didn't pay their dues to the Catholic Church and go down on their hands and knees around the kitchen table with the rosary every night. You know, it was a Catholic theocratic regime. He was deeply influenced by a man called John Charles McQuaid. So there was no divorce. I mean, divorce was like, there was just not even a thought of. Women were not allowed to work when they got married. My own mother had to give up her job and go and, perform domestic labour. There was the treatment of women, even to the extent that when women had children, 6 weeks afterwards, they would be brought to the church, what they call churching, where their sins and their impurities would be prayed away and they would be doused with holy water. This sounds like maybe a minor thing, but it actually really did influence the portrayal of women and pregnant women. So even if you were married when you got pregnant and everything, you never used any contraception, which was banned, even condoms, then even then you were impure. There was also what is still being reported on, the systematic institutionalized abuse of pregnant women, unmarried pregnant women and children. And the reports are still coming out and there are still cover-ups. So my view, that state was a deeply reactionary one, I'm sure you'll agree. But this was the flag it held over it, and of course De Valera had been one of the heroes of 1916, so he had this legitimacy of having this connection with the past that was revered for its for the nature of its anti-colonialism. And it also, so I've already mentioned the fact that the Irish struggle in the north of Ireland rumbled on during that period, but in the 1960s that became a very different phenomenon, with the struggle igniting in the 1960s, and particularly after 1972, the struggle against British imperialism. So now I just want to move on to a concept which is part of this whole I suppose, people for profit and the Irish left, and also it's a concept that Sinn Fein, which is the party that was formerly involved in the IRA and has since then moved on and become an establishment party. So in the 1940s, 1930s, just before the Second World War, De Valera was aware of the difficulty that he faced in terms of dealing with British imperialism. He didn't want the British government to have bases in Ireland, and so he said that Ireland was going to be neutral and would not take part in any war, would not take any side in the war. In reality, although there were no British bases in Ireland, they got plenty of help. They had these outposts, which you can see all around the coast of Ireland now, which basically were, that they would go and check for German invaders. There were the treatment of prisoners. If German prisoners, if German Air Force landed in Ireland, crashed in Ireland, they were detained. And if they were British or they were American, they were like, here you are, lads, pass back over the border, don't take those kind of risks again. It was like, in reality, they supported the Allies, they supported the United States. Of course they did. Ireland, the Irish government, has always been dependent on the United States and Britain. So, but nevertheless, despite this being in many ways, like I think a cynical move, it has become a very popular idea in Ireland, the fact that we are neutral, that we do not take a side. In fact, actually, De Valera banned anybody going to Spain during the Spanish Civil War to fight for either side. So it wasn't just that they were unwilling to sign up with the imperialists or the dictators of the world, they also did not want to take a side with those fighting against oppression. Okay, so then at the same time, and this is something which is ongoing, the United States Air Force regularly used Shannon Airport on the west of Ireland to refuel on its way to Europe and now to the Middle East. That was always allowed. There's never been any question that they could do so. Whenever there's been, actually, according to the law, you're not allowed to bring weapons through Shannon, but they do not check the planes. And everybody knows that even if it's just the case that it's personnel that are being sent from the United States to the Middle East, that they're going to be armed. It's known. You're not meant to fly weaponry over the Irish air fly zone, but they also do that. Even 1949, Ireland refused to join NATO, but it did pass on information to the CIA and allowed searches of planes going from Warsaw to Cuba. In the Afghan war, the Irish army provided training to NATO troops in Iraq. Again, with the Iraq war, it's the same. So basically, what you have is a situation where, for its own reasons, the Irish state has never got involved directly. Like, we have an army. In fact, my father was a member of that army, but they really only ever go to peacekeeping forces. But that even is changing as they are more and more involved in training and technical support for NATO, including in the North Sea, where there's all sorts of operations happening. So at the moment, the Irish government wants to move into a position of more integration with NATO. Maybe they might not formally join, but everything but that. They want to provide whatever facilities they can. In the Ukraine war, they provided any kind of non-weaponry support. So, okay. So basically, that's the kind of situation with neutrality as far as the government is concerned. In the north of Ireland, the war ended with the Good Friday Agreement, the demilitarisation of the IRA, and then the rise of constitutional republicanism, the second phase of constitutional republicanism. So today we have the Sinn Fein in the north of Ireland, a majority of the population, with First Minister Michelle O'Neill. So she now heads that institution. The Stormont Assembly, which was a crisis-ridden institution from the outset, has become a lot more stable in recent years. Sinn Fein is doing very well. It's a very effective political party. The DUP, which is the Protestant representative party, is in crisis. You may have seen that its leader has recently been convicted of serious sexual offences, which she is appealing, but the morale of the party is very low. It's not to say, though, and you cannot say that the politics of the Orange Order, of Protestantism in Northern Ireland, the unionism, has gone away. I really don't think that that is the case. In the Good Friday Agreement, the deal in terms of a united Ireland was that if the Secretary of State of the UK deemed that there was sufficient support for a united Ireland, North and South, he or she would make an order that there could be a referendum, and that referendum would be carried out by Britain in the north and by the Irish state in the south. Now, there is a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of technicalities with it. There's all sorts of, if you look at it, there's all sorts of cooling off periods and negotiation periods. It's really not like one measure that happens. But this is the way that Sinn Fein now want to obtain an independent Ireland, and also that is the way that the left, particularly because I'm speaking about them, People Before Profit, which is dominated by the Socialist Workers Network, which is a part of it's connected with the Socialist Workers Party in Ireland. It's part of their international Socialist Worker Party in Britain. It's part of their organisation. Formerly a Trotskyist organisation, it says that People Before Profit, which is the majority of, is a socialist organisation, but really you would be hard-pressed to find anything that really equates with socialism, particularly when it comes to internationalism. Okay, so now just to move on to look at Sinn Fein in the South. So Sinn Fein really only became part of Southern politics after the Good Friday Agreement, and then they have enjoyed a massive rise of support. In 2020, in the election in 2020, Sinn Fein went from 23 seats up to 37 seats in the Irish Dáil. We have a proportional representation system which allows, smaller parties more representation. So at the time, the two main parties were deeply unpopular. So the two main parties that come from the Irish Civil War are Fianna Fáil, which is generally the Republican Party, that's seen as the heir to those struggles, and Fine Gael, which is a more conservative party economically, but is less, it's been more like pro-social changes, like divorce or whatever. So anyway, so both parties were deeply unpopular. I think Fianna Fáil was in coalition with a smaller party at the time. Anyway, so Sinn Féin shot up in the polls. Now, at the time, the arguments for this left government had begun, and the Socialist Worker Network in People Before Profit had a number of TDs, Teachtaí Dála, which are MPs in Ireland. They had a number of MPs. I think that they had, or TDs, they had maybe 7 at that time. And I can explain to you how that happened, but I think it would take up too much time now. So basically, the idea emerged, the proposal emerged that People Before Profit would support the coming to power of a left government in Ireland, and that this left government, while not being a revolutionary government, would open up the way for a massive transformation. The idea is based on the notion that if you get rid of the two main parties, a new kind of politics will come into view. In 2022, People Before Profit, actually 2023, they produced the pamphlet. In 2023, they produced the pamphlet. In 2022, Richard Boyd Barrett spoke at a Marxism event here in London, and I wrote an article on it. And basically, his argument was like this. He expected there would be this left government in 2024 because Sinn Féin were on the up and were going to basically outpace the main parties. I should say that in 2020, Sinn Féin got 37 seats and Fianna Fáil had 38. So in Fine Gael, the other main party had less. So it did look like they were heading for a massive, not a landslide, but becoming a significant minority party. They said that Sinn Féin was likely to be the largest party. He said that basically that Ireland had changed radically from the time of De Valera, and certainly it had, and it has, that there had been, now you can get divorced. You can get married if you're gay, you can get an abortion. So all these things had happened in 2017 and 2018, and that north and south, there was a change in political temperature, because in the south, there was a growing radicalism and openness, and in the north, partly because of that, there was less of a fear of a united Ireland. The DUP and the Loyalists were becoming more unpopular, and young people were gravitating towards Sinn Féin, and more more Republican, not Republican, but like had a more open attitude to the prospect of a united Ireland. And he said, for the first time in history, we have a chance to achieve a left government. So basically, the slogan of a left government became the main slogan attached to the bottom of every article of People Before Profit. Now there is one other main faction in People Before Profit. There's the Socialist Worker Network, and then there's RISE, which is Paul Murphy, which is a split from the Socialist Party, kind of the party that connected with the Socialist Party here in Britain. It's them, basically, that it's another organisation. Now, so essentially, the role of People for Profit in a government with Sinn Fein would be to push Sinn Fein to the left. So Richard Boyd Barrett actually wrote to Sinn Fein and to Labour Party, I think, in around the next election in 2023, asking for talks. So they wanted Sinn Fein to look to them as a coalition partner rather than look to go into government as another minority coalition partner with Sinn Fein, with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. So basically, they said they pointed to their own involvement as People for Profit in pushing Sinn Fein to the left in campaigns, which really I don't accept their arguments, but they pointed to their involvement in water charges movement. There'd been a big movement against water charges in Ireland in 2015 when there were stringency measures imposed by the European Union. They talked about their involvement in all these campaigns, and they said that they wanted this like alliance, governmental alliance, which would topple Ireland over into a state of volatility and potential radicalism, and that would allow a great deal of change to take place. So, as I've already explained, that's predicated on the notion of this continuing movement to the left or in a progressive manner in the south, and the continuing sense of solidarity from the north, or kind of friendship, I mean, it is true that there is much more movement between the north and south now. Like last week, there was a first Fleadh, which is an Irish word for music festival, held in Belfast, which is said to have been a tremendous success. So there is a lot more movement, a lot more feeling that Northern Ireland is part of Ireland. In any event, I've already critiqued the notion of a left government. I think, you can probably take it that I think it's a complete, hopeless project for an organisation calling itself socialist. It bases itself on the idea that Sinn Fein, which it says in power in the north is right-wing, will be in power in the south with a left-wing group, left-wing. It sort of portrays Sinn Fein as somehow a certain kind of naivety, that Sinn Fein is coloured by the political environment it's in. And there's a certain truth in that it's populist, but it's populist to the right. It's not populist necessarily to the left, unless it is, well, maybe with abortion it did move, but I don't see it being because of the involvement of People for Profit. I think it just takes the mood, it looks at the polls and it decides what way it's going to go. Okay, so Oh, finally. Okay, just before I look at the far right. So, in the pamphlet that was produced by People for Profit in 2023, it talked about Irish neutrality. So there is a very strong section, well, I would say almost all of the left support campaigning for Irish neutrality. And it's something that I think is really problematic. I'm interested to see what comrades think. But anyway, in their pamphlet, Case for Left Government, they say that De Valera didn't want to get involved in the Second World War. And then he says, since then, Irish neutrality has emerged as a political understanding that the country should not be involved in imperialist war games. It is a position that is regularly supported by over 70% of the population in opinion polls. So, okay, then we've had the rise of the far right. So now, in 2020, when Richard Boyd Barrett is speaking and telling his audience that Ireland is moving to the left, it's a progressive society, the far right did not really exist as any significant feature in Irish politics. But during COVID, as has happened so many other places, a whole new number of groupings became, because of the COVID skepticism, they became a feature of, they became more noticeable as, right-wing or groups. A number of groups who had actually been groups in the Irish water, the anti-water campaign, not anti-water services campaign, they actually became now right-wing anti-COVID campaigns. So lots of them, Cork says no, Cove says no, Galway says no, Dublin says no. The politics of these groups changed, and those people that were left in them became a lot more anti-government laws, anti-masks, blah, blah, blah. And then they became, since then, become anti-migrant. So in terms of their activities as anti-migrant campaigns, they have become much more significant. They have become a threat to asylum seekers in particular. In Ireland, asylum seekers are housed in these big hostels. They're converted hotels. People are 10, 15, with women it's less, to a room in terrible conditions. But these people are targeted as the problem, and there are protests, regular protests outside them to try to get rid of them. So they would often open in small towns where, there would be the local hotel that hasn't been used for years because of the 2008 crash, had been turned into a direct provision centre. So the local people would be led into confrontation with the migrants, and they would try to kick them out. They also, this strand is conservative, socially conservative, anti-abortion. There's a lot of support for the church within it, anti-abortion, anti-LGBT, anti-modernisation in any sense. And there have been very violent attacks. Okay. There are international links with the United States and with Britain. Tommy Robinson has given his open support for some of the demonstrations in Dublin. Conor McGregor, who people may or may know of, a cage fighter, obnoxious individual. He's one of the prominent leaders. But what is actually more important is that the Irish government has moved in to that area of politics in order to show that it's going to be the toughest on migration. The European Pact, which comrades in other parts of Europe will well be aware of, has been instituted, and the treatment of asylum seekers is, well, it's so bad now. I represent asylum seekers. I'm very aware of what's happening, but it really is abysmal. Now, in this situation, Sinn Fein shifted, of course, to the right. Sinn Fein now, actually, well, maybe not now because the government has become so right-wing, but its position was that they needed to be tougher on deportations, tougher when it comes to those asylum seekers that are not genuine, meaning economic migrants using the asylum process because of the fact that they're so poor, their families have saved up, whatever reason that they've left, but they cannot fit into the strict criteria of refugee, which is very, very strict. And that's how it was set up in the 1950s, and that's how it's remained, is extremely strict. So Sinn Fein have moved to the right, and the Irish government has moved to the right, perhaps even ahead of them. So in the 2024 election, the results were not those expected or predicted by People Before Profit. Fianna Fáil went up 10 seats from 38 to 48. Sinn Féin did go up by 2 seats. Fine Gael went up by 2 seats. But then there was the entry of other smaller parties. The Green Party, which had been the smaller partner in government before then, was decimated from 11 to 1, and now we see the rise of the Social Democrats, which are a right social democratic formation, and the Labour Party, which is of similar politics. So now, when you're talking about a left government, you're not just talking about Sinn Féin, you're talking about these other parties also. And Sinn Féin have been trying very hard to get these parties to make a commitment to some kind of coalition in the 2028 elections, but it's very hard to see what will happen. I think that all of them want to get in on the main game, and I think that the likes of the Labour Party have made it very clear that they're not going to tangle with Sinn Féin if it's going to harm their prospects. Although Sinn Féin is a proper bourgeois party now and has done its utmost to try and court support from international capitalism, there's still a little bit of suspicion about it. I mean, the main 2 parties have always said they won't go into government with it, but I suppose it depends on how the election results pan out. Okay, so just my final points. So I believe that the question of self-determination, the national question, continues to exist in Ireland. That the British government still occupies part of Ireland, and that question will not go away without the working class taking up the struggle. I don't know about this Good Friday Agreement mechanism. I think it's very unlikely to succeed, but the key problem is the kind of politics it has creates a sense of basically being, well, and the People Before Profit supports this, that a united Ireland will of necessity be a progressive society that will put the left in a better position to lead a struggle to socialism. But as I've already outlined in the different ways in which Irish nationalism has expressed itself in power, it is much more likely to be a conservative entity. Ireland is completely beholden to the United States. The majority of factories and other companies in Ireland are US, and the Irish government is not going to do anything, whether it's Sinn Fein or whether it's Fianna Fáil, to upset that arrangement. So when people for profit talk about taxing the rich, well, I mean, you know, they don't seem to actually consider the fact that there would be a flight of the company, even if it got to that stage that these companies would leave Ireland. But in any event, just to come back to my main question, I think that the Irish left suffers from small island mentality. I think it's a little bit reflective of, well, it is actually very reflective of Scotland, the idea that we can do it on our own, we have all the resources we need, we don't need to depend on any other government, we can create socialism in this island. And then the whole neutrality question goes with that, which I think is, well, I'm completely opposed to that, because I think it's firstly, it's a misnomer. Secondly, why would you be neutral in the world? Surely you would be opposing the, imperialists. Of course you would be, but being neutral basically is just a cop-out. But because they believe that this is a popular question, then they can build on it. Again, it reminds me particularly of the Scottish Socialist Party and the idea that you could ride the wave of nationalism and that will your turn next. It'll be your turn next. Once the SNP come into power, then your term will be after that. So there's very little connection to internationalism. And when you talk about issues, I think the general idea is that you need to discuss them from the perspectives of resolving them within Ireland, and that there is such a thing as progressive nationalism at the present time. So it's not to say that I don't think that the struggle for national self-determination is any less important, but the content of the nationalism itself, I think, is. So for me, I think that the job of communists in Ireland needs to be to struggle for internationalism, needs to be to oppose all of these illusions and cul-de-sacs of neutrality, left governments, or anything of that kind. I think that we need to fight for internationalism, and particularly to work with British communists and the British working class, our closest neighbours, with whom we have many historical connections, particularly Irish communists in Britain, and before that the Chartists. But I also think it must be for British communists to call for United Ireland. I think that there is a tendency now in the left here, and I include my own comrades, to think of Northern Ireland as a settled issue, of it not necessarily mattering so much anymore, to think perhaps that, it's not really, not that it's not colonialism, but that the occupation is less important than it was before. But I don't agree with that. I think it remains the case that the occupation continues, and that it's something that we as communists need to challenge, but not for me. I think I need to fight for closer connections with you, but you need to fight for our freedoms. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the input, Anne. I'd want to open the floor for debates or contributions to the debate. We have a bit over an hour. If you are at home participating online, you can also participate in the debate via the Zoom, and then we'll be let through by Tina. So please raise your hands. To speak, come forward to the mic, and please be not like Colin, do not forget to introduce yourself so that the comrades at home also know who you are and where you're from. And by the way, I'm Colin from the Communist Platform in the Netherlands. In the back.
Hi.
Johnny here.
Can you please
Stand. No. Just leave it. Turn around. sorry, you weren't looking about it yesterday. If you just stand here so that people can see you. Thank you.
I missed the first 10 minutes of that, but like one thing that I didn't catch was anything to do with the shortage of housing, and surely the right wing, you know, the riots and the right wing anti-migrant movement needs to sort of be understood in that dynamic, because obviously that housing shortage is pretty dire, to put it mildly. So that's just one thing I wanted to raise. Thanks, Anne.
Mike.
Mike McNair, thanks, Anne, for very interesting introduction. A series of points, one of which you talked towards the end about the Irish economy and dependence on the United States. But in terms of the history in relation to Irish nationalism and the nature of the Valera regime and so on, you're very much talking about until 1972, the Irish economy was very, very, very immediately dependent on the UK economy. The 26 county economy was very, very, very immediately dependent on the UK economy, and was very much concerned with an agrarian economy which supplied agricultural products to the UK and which supplied migrant labour to the UK, and then entry into the European Union, although it was under aegis of the UK's entry into the European Union, entry into the European Union gave the framework for a transformation of the Irish economy, in particular, actually turning Ireland into another regulatory haven alongside the UK, independent, would form the basis for this independent partial industrialization under the United States on the basis of US investment, in a US investment which is drawn to Ireland by virtue of its being a low regulation regime. You said the far right weren't present. That's very much that's a very 26 county perspective, because of course the unionist organisations, with the partial exception of the official Unionist Party, have maintained for a very long time close relations with the British far right, from the time of the National Front through the British National Party, through etc. 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 The background, the comrade, I'm sorry, I forget your name.
John was my name.
John referred to housing shortage, but of course we have the whole context. We have housing shortage. Similarly, in the UK, this is a ground of attacks on migrants. But in reality, an awful lot of these things are the context is fraudulent misrepresentations of numbers by the mainstream bourgeois press. Which then say it's migrants taking the housing, which is causing the shortage of housing. We've got exactly the same thing, fraudulent misrepresentations. The anti-trans witch hunt is based on fraudulent misrepresentations. There are large numbers of fraudulent male to female transsexuals. It's a pack of lies, There are large numbers, similarly, the grooming gang story. This is fraudulent exaggerations of numbers, which is absolutely characteristic of the right wing press here, and I'm sure of the right wing press, mainstream right wing press in Ireland. The paradox about colonisation of Ireland is the relationship. It is true that the relationship of the British economy to the Irish economy is no longer a relationship of British colonisation of Ireland. That's true.
In the first place, because the historical relations between 26 counties and the UK as an agricultural supplier to the UK has garnered rise as a result of European Union and US investment, and we can now talk about Ireland as a low-wage, low-regulation colony of the United States. Secondly, on the other hand, the British control of the north of the 6 counties, it was never quite it was a settled colonial relationship in the 6 counties rather than a extractive colonial relationship in the 6 counties. But, and this is the other side of the coin, the beginning of British intervention in Ireland was always about strategic self-defence of the British bourgeois state. Strategic self-defence of the British bourgeois state against the threat of a French or Spanish or later French invasion force based in Ireland against the British state. And the reason for clinging on to the 6 counties was not primarily in order to exploit the 26 counties, which were marginal from the point of view of the British imperial economy of the 1920s. It was in order to maintain that military strike position, military position, to be able to maintain a military garrison which could intervene in the 26 counties in the event that the 26 counties departed from sitting under the wing of British imperialism. And behind that, James Connolly, I can't remember who it is who's done this work. It's a can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, anyhow, James Connolly was part of the Die Glocke German victories wing of the left. He's an advocate of German victory, and he's taking the project of the Easter Rising was connected with a project of taking arms from the Germans in order to fight British. I'm not saying that's unprincipled. It's unprincipled for Parvus and his co-thinkers in Germany to be German victory. It is not unprincipled for Connolly and co in Ireland to be German victories, but at the same time, in terms of the British state, and I raise the point simply because the British state still in fact, Policy Exchange, this Tory think tank, has published a report arguing for the necessity of maintaining the Union for geostrategic defence purposes to secure British control over the island of Ireland for the purposes of securing the Atlantic. Last year, so it is not something which has died from the point of view of the British state. So hence, I agree with Anne in relation to the self-determination question still posed. It's just that it's not posed in the way of economic colonialism as such. That's it.
One moment, stop. It was the other one. Yeah, that's that. Very interesting. Do you? Is it the question of migrants? It's like in this country, there's no real connection to the reality of why, unemployment and housing and all the rest of it. No context, no history. You're out there, Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, and the rest of it. In Ireland, my memory's a bit patchy now. The banking crisis, that was a massive thing in Ireland, wasn't it? The main bank signed themselves up to cover everything. Yeah, a bit flaky now on this, but a lot of people lost their homes, as I recall, at that time. And now, I would think there'd be a similar crash. Irish people with those bases. They have to do as they're told. The Irish companies, the Irish government, as they're told as regards tech companies and so on. And so if they're going to take all the electricity and all the water, bloody hell, that's the means.
Thanks, Anne. Marcus from Australia. A few questions. I was a bit surprised, and maybe I don't understand it, that you said green, white, and gold a few times, and not orange. But you did define the flag as orange as specifically being about unity between Ulstermen and Catholics. So why this attempt to drop the orangeness from the flag? I mean, why is it called gold sometimes? I've never encountered that before, given that it's specifically meant to be about unity of the peoples on that island. So I thought that was kind of sectarian, I suppose. I don't know where that comes from in Irish politics. I think for me the question is, I mean, as you were saying, Sinn Fein is now a bourgeois party, but I think it's now fundamentally, I think it's possibly better to consider it as it's now a constitutional party. It was an anti-constitutional party with its support for the armed struggle, and it is now very much a constitutional party. I don't follow Irish politics that closely, but I was just looking through the People Before Profit website as you were talking, and it to me also seems to be a constitutional party of Ireland. And I think that the border question is still the dominant political question in Ireland. And from my understanding of reading the Weekly Worker and CPGB comrades, I don't think that's gone away from the politics of the CPGB, so that, you know, people not taking the Northern Ireland question seriously anymore. I haven't witnessed that, but I may be missing something. But for me, it's still the dominant political question in that country. And there's no, if you look at, I tried to find People Before, if you look at its policies page, there's nothing on the border, there's nothing on Northern Ireland on its immediate policies. The only article I could find posits it purely within the Good Friday constitutional agreements of the border poll. We need a poll to dismiss the need for a poll. And so, to my mind, it would be that accepting the constitutional settlement that Sinn Fein accepted in 1997, or whenever it was, Good Friday, 1998, seems to me to be the question that should dominate constitutionally. So what constitutional what is the basis of your constitutional campaign as an Irish Marxist, like north and south of the border? That to me would seem to be a fundamental question that People Before Profit is not raising. And I think, yeah, the relations with the EU completely flip in the increased financialisation of the Irish economy away from an agrarian economy, I think is pretty important. On the question of housing, again, this is very superficial, so I just Googled it. So empty houses, there are 70 to 160,000 empty houses in the Republic of Ireland. The waiting list for housing in the Republic of Ireland is 62,000. So there doesn't seem to be a housing shortage in the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland's a bit tighter. There's 50,000 on the waiting list for social housing. In the north of Ireland, depending on how you count it, there's 20 to 52,000 empty houses in the north of Ireland. So I'm not saying you can just requisition the houses of these people without changing the constitutional basis of how you can do that. I think so. It is not. I think, but that should be the demand. I don't think there is a shortage of housing. There is a lack of political will and the wrong constitutional basis there. I'm also not sure. from again, superficially from the distance, it seems to me that the far right threat in Ireland is again connected to the border, is again connected to the historic division of Ireland in many ways, because it seems to be bigger in the north, connected to Ulster gangs, but and in other communities. The attitudes to migration in Ireland, again, just from Googling it then, are much more positive in Ireland than in almost any other European country, certainly much more positive than in Britain. So yeah, I presume from the outside where Marxists should be organising in Ireland is in people before profit. I know they won't let you in, but keep knocking, I would suggest. Find some friends to help you open the door, perhaps. And just finally on the question of neutrality, it actually seems a potential positive within Irish politics, and it can be connected to internationalism. So neutrality on inter-imperialist laws, so neutrality on the war in Ukraine, I think can come out of that, I doubt, and solidarity with just wars. And you said at the beginning that there is that within Irish culture, that connection with, you know, solidarity with Gaza. So doesn't sound neutral to me. That's not a neutral stance. So and in terms of calling for internationalism, I don't think it's just solidarity and work with Marxists and communists in Britain, but across Europe, and historic calls for the Communist Party of the European Union. I know Britain is not in the European Union at the moment, but I would say that those sorts of calls for a European-wide communist organisation would also fit in there. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I'm quickly react that before we continue.
Hold on.
I basically, I just wanted to add something in that I should have said, and it's an important point. Sorry, I was trying to say too much, really. Well, what I wanted to say about the right wing in Ireland is that it also connects itself in with Irish history, with the 1916 uprising, you know, our patriots, our Irishness, our uniqueness, and the whole great replacement theory of Irishness being watered down, being, you know, basically our society being watered down, our Irishness being watered down. This is a threat to our civilization, which I know these are themes that exist elsewhere, but so they also, of course, and that's another thing, that they use the Irish flag, and there's been this controversy about their right to use it. Now, this is something that's particularly the case with Sinn Fein, but he's also in the Palestine movement. There's been discussions about, should we bring more Irish flags? So we can see that Irishness is really about internationalism rather than exclusion of other nationalities. So there's been that question, but they connect themselves in with that. So, like, and many issues are agreed, you know, about like the role of Ireland, the role against imperialism, of Ireland against imperialism, those struggles. So many people on the Republican movement, within the Republican movement, and indeed it's reflected in Sinn Fein and its move to the right, feel that sense of there's enough people in Ireland, we can't keep taking on more. And so that's an important point, like just in terms of housing. Well, I mean, I know that housing, of course, is an extremely important question, and in Ireland, housing is big business, is landlordism, and it's like even like actually different than in Britain, because it's the source of so much of the profits and of the investments of big business. So yes, housing is an issue, but I think myself that the problem goes much deeper than that. As I've explained, it's a form of nationalism that looks back to this kind of past when everything was simpler, when you know, when we were all just Irish here and we were sitting around the fire and, you know, singing our songs and, you know, like when we weren't this more open economy. So that's the point. I think I was just trying to make that point, that it all comes from the same source, and that how nationalism, even nationalism of a small nation that has historically placed itself in opposition to colonialism, at least in terms of British, can itself become reactionary, and that its notions on neutrality. No, I don't agree on that question with Marcus, but those issues are issues of a complicated nature. It's true, but they're definitely not socialist, in my view. Anyway, thanks.
So speaking that way. Hi, my name is Owen McGinley. I am based in Dublin, Ireland. I am one of the small.
Speak up, please.
Oh, come a bit closer to
I'm one of the small handful of partyists within people before profit. And yeah, thank you, Anne, for that introduction. And there's a lot of different things I could comment on. But I think, yeah, speaking generally about Irish nationalism and neutrality, I think what you said was very much correct. I think it is such a widespread sentiment on the Irish left is that we have to defend neutrality. It's never a policy of the Irish state, not really. It's not a constitutional thing like, say, in Austria. The main kind of point that is used to kind of argue that Irish neutrality does exist is this triple lock, that there has to be agreement by the UN, either by the Security Council or the Assembly, and two other aspects I have forgotten, in order for Ireland or the Republic of Ireland to deploy a certain amount of troops overseas. This is so-called Irish neutrality, right? And much of the Irish left is sort of preoccupied with defending this last bit, which the government, the Sinn Fein government, does want to get rid of eventually, although they're facing some opposition within their own ranks. But the point is that, yes, this is a sort of a blindness towards all the problems of the capitalist state, right? It's just not really taken seriously on the Irish left, unfortunately. Similar with nationalism. It is always kind of assumed in the Irish left that Irish nationalism always was and always kind of will be a kind of a progressive thing, a progressive, and certainly Irish voters should fight for self-determination, right? The end of partition, but that also means the end of the Good Friday Agreement, the end of the Constitution of the Irish Republic, Southern Ireland, right? This also comes to blows in fighting the far right. It's a relatively new phenomenon. There's sort of growing dedicated far right, you know, south of Ireland. It's not new. There was one in the 30s and a bit in the 40s and 50s, but it's relatively new within the living political memory south of the border. And that this, so much of what the Irish left considers to be anti-fascism is just nationalism, with slogans like "Love Ireland, hate race." Sorry guys, the far right, they love Ireland as well, you know. They'll fucking like hunt down people because of their skin color because they love Ireland. Like, oh, this is such insanity. And yeah, I think that on the topic of people for profit, I mean, I would say that people for profit is a socialist party, but I don't think that this is a particularly high bar to clear. I mean, it's certainly not a communist party, that's for sure. A lot of issues were kind of mentioned with that big one being left government, right? This was never really a coherent thing. Yes, there was a pamphlet that was published in 2023 that outlined some kind of vision for how this will work. People before profit joining a government with some other left forces, kind of coyly saying, oh, maybe Sinn Fein, knowing full bloody well that Sinn Fein would never join anything like a anti-capitalist, you know, or socialist government. It's just like lying to people, basically, to even imply that. it suggests that there will be a mass movement of popular these, 20th, first century, like Soviets, essentially, is how it's devised, and that these will somehow be the power base of the left government, but also be what the left government is sort of developing and sort of enforcing. The questions of the state here is not really addressed at all. It's a kind of vaguely references army and police, but that's it. It doesn't really reference the constitutional order proper and mechanisms of the state. The international question is just kind of hand waved. It's like, well, hopefully across the world there'll be something similar going on. It's just not like an actual engagement, not really just not taking them seriously. The also problem with left government is that depending on who you talk to, it changes upon what it is. I will hear one thing from Kieran Allen, prominent member of People for Profit. I hear another from Paul Murphy or Richard Boyd Barrett, to our RTDs in the Irish Parliament. That's not how you, organise a political social strategy, right? And yeah, the heart of this problem is the transitional method dominating People for Profit. There's nothing like a program of any kind. We desperately need one, a maximum minimum program, of course. As Anne mentioned, would be in favour of transitional programs. It'd be more traditional, a little bit more traditional Trotskyist than the SWN, which is the sort of Tiffite network, which itself also has internal factions, not officially, of course, but like de facto. There's roughly 3 factions that have kind of emerged because of frustration with People for Profit's politics, not towards like a sort of parties for market position by any means, but certainly a growing dissatisfaction with the freneticism and inconsistency that comes with the kind of left government and the way it's used, but also a very widespread, commonly understood idea in People for Profit is the so-called United Fronts, which are in fact basically popular fronts, in that they're based on, there's this idea that you set up a United Front with Sinn Fein, the bourgeois party, the Social Democrats, which is why being split off from the Labour Party, are essentially a petty bourgeois party. They aren't trade unions at all, and that this will somehow be the way that you reach people. You reach people based on these. One of these United Fronts that's into existence now is the Affordable Ireland Coalition, which is fighting for price caps and some relief. But I mean, that's not how you really help people, and it's not going to motivate people. There'll be a protest in September that no one will go to. We've done this multiple times already. It's not going to work. Probably third time, I think. And yeah, so People for Profit, there's a lot of things that have to change there for what's to become a genuine mass socialist party. One positive thing, though, of course, is that it is possible to disagree with the overall vision and still be a part of it. Any other political organization, socialist political organization, a lot of people just get kicked or bullied out if you disagree with leadership. And so there's a kind of a tolerance of different opinion, but no proper democratic debate, not openly anyway. Marxism and like any kind of revolutionary strategy is kept kind of quite internally. So there's kind of a mismatch between what People for Profit says outwardly, and then members say to themselves, which makes it difficult to build anything if you don't recruit people. And then there's a different narrative to the external one. It's kind of difficult for people to see the point. I mean, I kind of had difficulty with that until sort of coming to partyist ideas. Yeah, I think there was a lot mentioned that was quite good by some of the other comments. Yeah, Anne McShane, you mentioned that the solution really to this is to work primarily with British comrades. I mean, that's wrong, unfortunately, in that, like, even if things go incredibly well on these islands, we declared a world commune from Dublin to London, like, we'll just all starve together. Like, that's what will happen. We need the continental vision, like, that's the minimum, really. And, obviously that involves the fighting the European Union from within, but also outside of it, so Britain, Norway, Switzerland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Turkey, etc. Right? and yet partition obviously still is a big political problem. And the key one, it's not like the problem with border, it's not really that much towards the far right. I mean, the far right are very keen to work with unionists. I think the far right, they're very much for a closed border in many ways, because one of their talking points is about, all migrants coming in from Britain. So, and yeah, there's a few other things that I probably forget to say, but whatever. And yeah, even for the Constitutional Party, I would disagree, but the problem is that it is not a firmly anti-constitutional party. I mean, it officially believes in, a different kind of society, right? It holds certain principles that aren't compatible with the constitutional order up under there, or the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. But at the same time, it doesn't explicitly say that. It doesn't lay out exactly that a social society cannot be built on the current constitutional order. It doesn't exactly fight for a new one, a different one, and that's the problem. That's why people for profit needs a maximum minimum problem, right? Yeah, I think that's about it. That's one.
Yeah, Jack, Conrad. My guess is what you've got is in the South, an anti-migrant right. I mean, there's always been a right. I mean, I don't know which one is which. I can never remember Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil. But I mean, as you say, one is, I don't know, Collins, the other one's De Valera. De Valera comes in with a thumping majority, introduces a theocratic hellhole. I mean, is that left wing in any noticeable sense? Okay, they took a neutral position in terms of the Spanish Civil War, but they had sympathy clearly with the Catholic Church, which was being persecuted by the Republicans, so we all know what side they actually were on. Why anti-migrant? Because Ireland, Mike referred to it. All you need to do, you referred to it as well, the Chartists, the British Labour movement. I mean, half of it, when I joined the CPGB, our leadership was either Scottish, Jewish, or Irish. And that's not, it's a slight exaggeration, but not much of an exaggeration. The Chartists were clearly, led by Irish people. Engels talked about, give me 1,000 Irishmen and I'll overthrow the British Empire. Go to his house up the road if anyone hasn't been to London before. Engels' house used to be covered in the colours of the Fenians, etc., etc. So Britain and Ireland have always been, bound together for good or bad. But the point would be that if you take London being built, the railways being built, who built it? Irish navvies. Ireland was the source of labour. And so Ireland bled people and referred to the potato famine. And, I don't know, was it half the population, quarter of the population, third of the population, whatever it was, huge exodus, not only people dying, but leaving from Britain, leaving for America. So it's a country, isn't it? I think the figures were, before the potato famine, 8 million. Right, what's the population of the whole of Ireland now? See? So, historically, people have left it. And so Ireland, in that sense, has been a nation of migrants. Everyone in Ireland will have someone, I don't know, in Boston or in
Sydney.
I was about to think up, I can't remember the name of the road. Anyway, whatever the various, but Willesden or wherever it is, or Sydney, as you say, and anyway, so people going to Ireland from abroad, that's a new thing, isn't it? So I'm not saying no one's ever done it, but this is a new thing. And I think what has shocked some people on the left is precisely the assumption, Ireland, good, we take the side of migrants because that's uncle so-and-so or auntie this or grandfather that. And as soon as people come to Ireland, right, then things change. And I think it's a shock. But as Mike was saying, you know, that if you take Ireland, Ireland includes the north. And, you know, all I can say is, you know, I've been in the north much more than I've been in the south. And we've had schools in the north. And all you need to do is go with a Republican comrade for a car trip around Dublin. They are, to use a phrase, a Dublin, Belfast, excuse me, thank you. All you need to do is sit next to them, and in certain parts of the city, they're shitting themselves, right? Because certain parts of the city, you know, the not paving stones, the curbstones are painted orange, right? Red, white, and blue, right? Or if you take the Republican areas, they're painted in the colours of the tricolour, orange, whatever, green and white, anyway, whatever it is. Anyway, the point I'm making is the city is visibly divided. And precisely if you go to bars, Catholic bars will have, you know, the Palestinian flag. What flag do the Protestants, the loyalists display? Obviously the flag of Israel. So there's a far right in Ireland, in the north, clearly, but in the south, I just think that there's, you know, because something's new, that's been labelled far right, and that's to ignore the reality of the establishment parties. It's a bit like in Britain, you know, you have Reform, that's the far right. What about the Tory party? I mean, is this, I mean, some people think of it as centre. What? I mean, sorry, it's a far right party. If you take our Tory party, what bloc in the European Union Parliament did it join? You know, it didn't join the Christian Democrat centre, or let alone the Social Democratic centre. It joined the bloc of the far right, and it's because it's the norm. We sort of just naturalise that. So what's new is, you know, Reform. Reform is just a Tory party in exile, or a different version of it. Okay, just a couple of points. Okay, what gets me about the comrades in Ireland? I don't know enough about the internal life of people before profit. Why aren't comrades campaigning to allow Anne to join? Right? I mean, that strikes me as slightly off. You know, if we're talking about solidarity, we're talking about a political organisation that allows debate, some sort of democracy. You're a partyist, she's a partyist. What makes her a bad person? I mean, is she particularly rude, particularly, you know, I don't know. What's wrong with that? And we need to be asking comrades that. Why is she barred? And I don't think it's an obscure question. You know, I think it's an important question. If this party is socialist, why shouldn't socialists be allowed in, right? I mean, what test has she got to pass? Is it because she's got principles? Well, perhaps, and that's really what brings me to the SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party in Britain. I think still with Alex Kalinikos as international secretary, I'm not sure, but certainly he has been the head of their international socialist tendency. And you get in Britain, Socialist Workers' Party, revolutionary. How comes then that their comrades in Ireland are talking about entering into a coalition government? Whatever we call Sinn Fein, it's no longer revolutionary. You cannot describe it as revolutionary. Do you describe it as bourgeois? I suspect you do. So what is Alex Kalinikos, what is the SWP in Britain doing about people in Ireland who want to join a coalition with the bourgeoisie? Absolutely nothing. They give them platforms. They clap them to the rafters. So when Richard, I know he's been ill, but when he comes to Britain, he's treated as some sort of conquering hero, you know, rah, 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 Richard. So Owen, you said that, I think it was you, Owen, you said that that they, you know, Sinn Fein wouldn't join such a coalition. I think Sinn Fein would join such a coalition because Sinn Fein would be the dominant party, right? Sinn Fein isn't some obscure party with a couple of TDs. People Before Profit is an obscure party with a couple of TDs, MPs as we would call it. And precisely, if Sinn Fein did well in the elections, in order to add the numbers up, in order to take them, you know, to 51% or whatever the particular percentage you need in order to get a majority in the door, they would have People Before Profit in. They would have whatever else there is to hoover up. And what happens, of course, isn't that Sinn Fein would change. It's the left would become ministerial or socialist or lose their seats next time around because people just turn around and say, they're just like Sinn Fein. They're no different. So I think it's not something that we should dismiss. That won't happen. I think it could quite conceivably happen. I mean, I'm just looking at you, Gus, there. Would the Socialist Party in the Netherlands join a government of the bourgeoisie as an add-on? I mean, it'd be a love to. Would De Linke in Germany join such a coalition with the Social Democrats? It would love to. Richard wants to get his feet on a junior ministerial chair. He wants. I'm not saying he's into money. He wants to drive the ministerial car. He wants to have all the hangers on. He wants to have all the goodies that come with ministerial power. And what you get, I mean, I'm going to finish here. We've had a description from comrades in Ireland, I think from the Socialist Party side of things. These organisations, from my understanding, are dominated by the TDs, right? And they're because they employ people, right? And so it becomes a sort of a power, something that reproduces power. So maybe that's the problem with Anne. No, I'm being serious, because she's going to be pointing the finger and saying, what sort of an organisation is it? She's not part of this conspiracy in that sense. On the outside, we say this, but we say this on the inside. The reality is, on the inside, they're lying to each other. That's actually, we're really left-wing, we're really revolutionary. Actually, it's on the outside is the truth. On the inside, it's a happy story that keeps people motivated. We're really revolutionaries, we're Leninists, we're Marxists. They aren't Leninists and they're not Marxists. What they are is career politicians, left-wing career politicians who want to administer capitalism. That's the reality. For the benefit of the working class, no doubt. Can capitalism at this stage deliver lots of goodies for the working class? I would argue it can deliver very little.
Yeah, continue to become
Precisely.
Yeah, I've got two more people on the list, and I think we're slowly want to close up. So please put your hand up. We've still got enough time. Let's see. Yeah. So next would be.
Yeah, very interesting things, and I also enjoyed Owen's contribution. I do think, I mean, when you come back, it'd be interesting to hear if there is are you just yourself, or you're part of a faction, or is it possible to have a faction in and out? Could there be a partyist trend that is allowed to join, and maybe renew your application? But when you last tried to join, some comrades are asking online because they didn't quite catch that. Is it worth trying again? And it is. It appears to be the biggest left organisation, socialist organisation in Ireland, so it's probably worth doing it. I do just wonder if they have, like the Linke in Germany, no doubt. It stood in the last parliamentary election on the basis of not entering national government, but as Jack says, that would, would they be asked, they'd be like a blushing bride and go on then, we have to show we're responsible. I'm sure it's similar trend in people before profit, that you think you have to, the socialist left has to take responsibility, and of course it ends up managing capitalism in decline, enforcing cuts and being punished in the next election. The link is died, and on the regional level, plenty of times, and every single time it gets slapped and goes down in the polls. And it's actually done quite well because it has temporarily decided not to do that. And it's got certain red lines that are, move constantly. You have to have, we'll only join government if blah, 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 blah. I wonder if people for profit have that at all and what their red lines are. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but I think you mentioned it 7 TDs, but that's gone down, isn't it? 3 TDs, two TDs now. So it's actually, there might be part of the, they might be asked if it's, if Sinn Fein really could do a deal, but it's become less likely actually now. I mean, we would, as communists have said, we don't. In declining capitalism, you'd be a fool to try and join a government. If we could implement our full program, that would be the condition under which we could consider joining in the government. But that, of course, isn't the case at all at the moment, and that's not on the cards at all. But we're not saying never ever, under these conditions, it would be absolute madness, and it would be a totally different political period. Just quickly on the right, and it's been in the papers the last couple of days, and just wondering if you could put that into context. The new IRA, no idea who they are, is that serious or not? Basically, they're going on an anti-migrant witch hunt. You've got 24 hours illegal migrants, 24 hours to leave Ireland. If not, we're coming for you. That's what the IRA, the new IRA, is doing now. If you could just put that in context, I suspect it's 2 people and a dog, and nothing particularly of any seriousness. But of course, this right-wing anti-migrant trend is a global trend at the moment, and it'll become more serious. It'll become, with the climate catastrophe, you'll have more people coming to Britain. You'll have more people coming to Ireland, probably as well, as they're fleeing their increasingly uninhabitable areas and countries. So it is important that we get our policies on that right and don't, succumb to the right. And I wonder what People Before Profit says on the question of if it's. I'm sure they're not in favor of open borders. How they're dealing with that. In terms of the tricolour, I think that's a sort of the Irish flag. Sorry, it's a tricolour. Yeah. Tricolour. Sorry. I know you're.
The French say tricolour.
Of course, well, yes, and that's.
Yeah. I know what you feel quite uncomfortable about it, and we've had conversations with, you shouldn't bring them to Palestine demonstrations and stuff. I think it's probably a bit more difficult than, it's not like the Union Jack, is it? It's not bringing the Union Jack to a protest. I think it's kneecap, the balaclava is that colour. I think a lot of young people probably do see it as some kind of, wrongly guessed, but perhaps, but it's still a sort of in the spirit of the colours of the oppressed internationally, oppressed for Britain, etc. So I think I'd be slightly more relaxed about that it's not the same kind of nationalism as the Union Jack or German flag or something like that. So yes, we're internationalists, and Owen quite right. We're a continental view, and I'm sure Anne agrees with that as well. She just thought, from the historical perspective, British and Irish, working quite closely. But I'm sure she's, I know she's not saying forget about the Europe context. Of course, we can't have socialism in Britain and Ireland and the rest. Whatever, go to hell. We could do it just those 2 countries. No, absolutely no chance. So I don't think she was saying that. But yeah, ideally they'd have the red flag at these protests, and bring your red flag. But I think the Irish flag probably does have a different content still than the Union Jack or the German flag for that matter. Okay. Thanks very much, Anne. Yeah. Okay. On the Palestine marches in London, there is an Irish contingent, which is, from my impression, mainly Sinn Fein dominated. They carry the tricolour, and they have various organisations. One is called the Irish in Britain, and there's another one in commemoration of Terence McSweeney, who was an Irish martyr who the British murdered really in Brixton Jail in 1920, who was a leader then of the Irish movement. And it so happens that I married a man whose grandmother was his wife, Muriel McSweeney. So what I didn't realise until Anne spoke about the De Valera situation, the extreme Catholic adherence, I didn't realise that. So what happened when Muriel Murphy, who came from a Cork rich whiskey distillery family, married Terence McSweeney, who was a leader of the Irish rebellion, and also from Cork. He wasn't going to get married because he was a man who was constantly on the run from the British. But Muriel was a rebel, and they married and had a daughter Moira in 1918. Anyway, the British murdered the mayor of Cork, I think around 1918-19. And Terence McSweeney took his place, and the British arrested him and put him in Brixton Jail. He went on hunger strike, 79 days, and then died. And his wife Muriel went with Sinn Fein, the Irish movement then, and went around Europe and America raising funds for the leaders of the 1916 uprising, who were all shot by the British. And she and Terence McSweeney, sisters, who are also very revolutionary, they went doing these fundraising talks from 1920 onwards. Anyway, Muriel, so McSweeney was a strong Catholic. He was a poet and a writer, an educator. Muriel became communist, and she became one of the first members of the Irish Communist Party, I think around 1923. And in that capacity, she visited France, also raising funds for the the families of those who were shot. And she met an Irish communist reporter from L'Humanité, from the French Communist Party. They had an affair, and she produced another child, Alex, and she refused to marry Pierre Kahn, who was the French communist journalist, deliberately took the baby Alex back to De Valera, 1926, this was now, when Alex was born, who's my mother-in-law, thinking that because of her status as the wife of Terence McSweeney, it was like a massive hero, because he had died in hunger strike in British jail. She would be able to do something for the mothers who, as Anne was saying, being persecuted. People were put in these places called the Magdalene Laundries, for example, where they worked often for the rest of their lives. Anyway, she brought this baby to De Valera, demanding that the laws against the unmarried mothers should be rescinded, and he absolutely refused. And I didn't realise that that was why until I heard Anne's description of De Valera. So in relation to the general political points that we're thinking about of nationalism really versus internationalism, well, I was in the WRP for many years, the Workers' Revolutionary Party, from 1968 till it blew up in 1985. It was a terrible trustist organisation. But in 1975, when the EU, I'll finish.
Just because time passed.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, just I'll finish this bit. In 1975, when the referendum on the EU was taking place in Britain, the WRP did say no to the EU, yes to the United States of Europe, Socialist United States of Europe, which I think was a correct position. Thanks.
We've still got 8 minutes, so if you two could share that, Owen. So we managed to get to lunch in time.
Yeah, I'll be as brief as
Speak
possible.
up, please.
I'll be as brief as possible.
Oh, you could take it in your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, so about the comment by Jack about Sinn Fein and the left government, specifically referencing to how left government was envisaged in the 2023 pamphlet by Youth for Profit, which is imagined itself as a sort of revolutionary style government. I mean, obviously, in a very incoherent way, it's not, it isn't what it says it is. So I was specifically referring to that rather than, you know, obviously it's not an impossibility, but people before profit could end up in essentially a bourgeois government. I was specifically referring to like the official PBP conception of left government. And yeah, about Richard Boyd Barrett desperately wanting to be a junior minister. I mean, I think that's inaccurate, and I think it doesn't actually explain the problems that people before profit has. I mean, it's the main problem is this roughly sort of Trotskyist judicial method idea, which is kind of based on this kind of delusional idea of kind of mass movement springing out of nowhere and you know, changing everything, combined with this the kind of reformist attitude. I mean, which like it's funny because Richard Boyd Barrett is a kind of popular kind of figure. Also is the TD in the constituency where people from profit has its largest branch. I mean, if he desperately wanted above all else to be a junior minister, he could very easily become an independent and become a minister. I mean, the Irish political system makes that very easy. It's very easy for kind of popular independents to become ministers. So I think it's simply inaccurate. I mean, Richard Boyd Barrett is definitely on the right of the party. There's no question about that. And we definitely do have a problem of, you know, the TDs and the influence of bourgeois parliament influencing people for profit. I mean, it's obvious on the website, as Marcus pointed out, you know, policies of this is kind of the typical bourgeois kind of wonkery that like informs like bourgeois politics. I mean, it's kind of widely accepted that there's a danger of, you know, the parliament influencing people for profit and shaping it, which obviously it does, but it's not taken that seriously as it needs to be taken. And there's also kind of leads to the question where about, you know, Anne was essentially rejected from joining the party about 4 years ago. I think I can't remember the exact, but I think the official, you know, there was no announcement or anything. It was very just kind of, you know, the National Secretary at the time, Keir Allen, decided that, you know, Anne couldn't be a member. And it was largely based on an article that had been written in the Weekly Worker shortly before that. And, you know, supposedly it was, you know, whatever, evidence of rhetoric, just, you know, rhetoricism or something, which is nonsense, right? Regardless of what was in the article, I can't remember, I roughly remember, but yeah, it's a nonsense reason to exclude someone on that basis. So, you know, and we can definitely get you in. I mean, the irony of it, I mean, Anne, you live in Cork, which is where, you know, there are very few Cliffites and quite a few partyists. So, you know, we could, if we organize ourselves, we could probably get you in the door. And yeah, there was and a point, yeah, that Tina mentioned about the party's building a faction that has been slowly coming to fruition over the last few months. It was meant to be announced publicly last week, but now it has to be this week. So hopefully, all going well, it'll be in the next few days. We'll be putting out our positions and our theses publicly, everything as you know, it should be done. There's no official right to factions in people before profit. There's nothing banning them either. It's all kind of run on informal precedent, which is how a lot of things in people before profit work, unfortunately. But yeah, we're determined to use every opportunity to can.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, to fight for principal Francis Limited.
Thank you.
Yeah, 3 minutes, okay.
I can overrun a little bit, it's not a big deal.
Okay, well, look, we have another meeting. Okay,
one.
look, firstly, I want to very much welcome Owen to this debate and to thank you very much for your remarks. I'm glad that you're a partyist. I'm glad that there are others of you within People for Profit. Of course, in Cork, I'm aware of, I work closely with comrades. I've been chair of the Palestine Solidarity campaign for a year, and I work closely with comrades. And they all say, you know, Anne, we're sorry, because it's not going to go. You know, it's not going to happen. And the reason is because I criticised Richard Boyd Barrett. I said Richard Boyd Barrett was an opportunist, and I said that he was looking forward to his ministerial position. Now, ambition to change, to bring about change in Ireland through participation in a left government. I don't believe that he just wants to be a TD for the sake of it, but I believe that his programme leads him to opportunism, and therefore, in many respects, he manifests, he personifies the move of People for Profit towards bourgeois politics, towards inclusion in a left government. He is the face of that. So because I criticised him, rather than criticise some kind of other aspect, some non-essential aspect of the programme, that's why my application was not revoked. I was a member for about 5 days because you can just join online. And then I went to a meeting of the new members, and some people were like expressing pro-Ukraine government sentiments, and other really, like I would say, not strange, but you know, dodgy political ideas. Ono Canavan was the chair, very nice guy. He's a singer and an activist, and I thought, well, you know, it went fine. I did see Kieran Allen blanch a little bit when he saw me, but I thought that's fine. And then I got an email to say, here's your money back. It was that like bureaucratic approach of you were never really a member because your ideas are not in accordance with People for Profit. But now I hear, and I have been hearing, that there are people in People for Profit parties who've been raising the same issues as me, but, you know, and I had been told beforehand, of course you can join, it's an open organisation. But no, there wasn't. So I do think that there's toleration up to a point, to the point that it's not going to become a threat to the leadership. Like in March of this year, there was a conference, I think, not a congress, a conference, where this question of the left government was discussed. And I know that the opposition within the party made their points, but they were unsuccessful, and it kind of doubled down, which, you know, I was even a little bit surprised about, given this, the movement of Sinn Fein to the right, and the fact that, you know, you're dealing with a different entity even than you were in 2020. But nevertheless, that was the case. Now, I haven't read much debate. I wish there was more open debate. I know that Horizon Journal is publishing a little bit. One split was Red Network, who I applied to join. We had a meeting, but anyway, it hasn't gone anywhere, but I think that they were wrong to leave. So, I mean, there's been a lot of questions raised, and I'm very happy with the discussion we're having. I'm glad that we're opening up these issues. My main point, and maybe I'm harder on it than some other comrades, is that nationalism, even small nation nationalism, poses a real problem for the working class. And that, yes, of course, I agree with European unity, but I look at the British working class movement, and of course there's this tension because of continued occupation of Northern Ireland, because of the fact that Irish people are so conscious of despite that there is no economic oppression, you know, of Ireland by Britain anymore, there's still always the shadow, you know, there. And so that we have to get over our own, you know, sense of Irish nationalism in order to move forward and build the kind of party that we need and make those connections to hopefully bring about, may not be made, but in the future, a revolution in Europe. Thanks. Thanks very much, Colin.
Can I make an announcement, please? I'm still taking money for some are offensive.